The laughter began long before anyone realized history had already changed. It rolled through the Grand Council chamber like a living wave, echoing beneath a ceiling of transparent crystal that revealed the endless stars beyond. Thousands of representatives from every corner of the known galaxy filled the colossal amphitheater, their towering forms, shimmering exoskeletons, and luminous eyes reflecting the cold light of distant suns. Species that had conquered black holes, harvested neutron stars, and bent gravity itself into weapons sat comfortably upon floating platforms, watching a single holographic projection suspended above the chamber's center. On that projection drifted Earth's fleet, small, silent, and hopelessly outmatched. Compared to the impossible armadas surrounding it, the human formation looked less like a military force and more like an outdated museum exhibit accidentally placed on a modern battlefield. Some delegates covered their mouths to hide their amusement. Others didn't bother. Mocking applause rippled through the audience. To them, humanity's final stand wasn't a tragedy. It was entertainment. Far beyond the Council's polished halls, in the frozen darkness above the fractured moon of Karos, those same human ships floated without movement. The battlefield stretched for millions of kilometers, illuminated by the pale glow of a dying blue giant star. Fragments of shattered asteroids drifted slowly between fleets like the ghosts of forgotten wars, while the silent vacuum carried no sound, only the terrifying stillness before unimaginable violence. Human vessels bore scars earned through decades of conflict. Their armor was worn. Their hulls carried patches from countless repairs. They lacked the elegant curves and radiant energy fields that made alien warships appear almost divine. Instead, they were built from thick steel, exposed framework, and uncompromising purpose. Every scratch on their surface told a story of survival rather than perfection. Inside the flagship Vanguard, the bridge remained eerily calm. Hundreds of tiny indicator lights glowed across dark consoles, casting soft reflections across focused faces. No one spoke louder than a whisper. Every officer understood exactly what waited beyond the reinforced hull. Every sensor displayed the same impossible reality, thousands of enemy vessels surrounding them from every direction, enough firepower to erase continents with a single coordinated volley. Yet the silence aboard the bridge wasn't born from panic. It was something far heavier. Acceptance. The kind forged only after years of preparation for a moment everyone hoped would never arrive. Admiral Elias Kane stood motionless before the forward observation window, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the endless sea of hostile lights. Somewhere beyond those distant warships lay Earth, a small blue world filled with ordinary people who had no idea how close they stood to extinction. Children were still laughing in schoolyards. Families were still eating dinner together. Millions were looking up at the night sky without knowing that the fate of their species rested in the hands of fewer than 10,000 souls drifting through the void. Kane closed his eyes for only a moment, allowing himself one final memory of oceans, rain, and sunlight before burying it beneath absolute discipline. If this was to be humanity's last day, then fear had no place on his bridge. Back inside the council chamber, the ridicule only intensified. Ancient empires whispered predictions about how quickly the primitive humans would surrender. Military analysts casually debated which alien fleet would claim the first kill. Historians quietly prepared to record the extinction of yet another civilization that had dared to challenge galactic authority. No one questioned the outcome. No one imagined surprise. The verdict had already been written before the battle even began. But there was one thing the council could not see. Beneath the silence. Beneath the stillness. Behind every calm face aboard every human ship. Not despair. Not surrender. Only patience. And somewhere in that endless darkness, where the stars themselves seemed to hold their breath, destiny waited for a single command that would silence an entire galaxy forever. For 3 centuries, humanity had lived beneath the galaxy's shadow, not because it lacked ambition, but because it had chosen a different path. While the great interstellar empires raced to master quantum manipulation, dark energy reactors, and living biotechnology, Earth quietly disappeared behind the veil of its own frontier. To the rest of the galaxy, humans were an evolutionary curiosity, a stubborn species that still forged machines from alloys instead of growing them from engineered organisms. Their ships were mocked for their angular hulls, exposed armor plating, and visible engines that burned with old-fashioned fusion flames instead of elegant gravitic halos. Galactic historians described humanity as technologically stagnant. Politicians dismissed Earth as an irrelevant backwater. Military academies rarely mentioned the species at all, except as an example of a civilization that had failed to keep pace with progress. Few noticed that while others displayed their greatest achievements for the galaxy to admire, humanity revealed almost nothing. The Vanguard drifted silently at the center of Earth's formation, its dark hull absorbing the pale light of distant stars. Unlike the sleek vessels surrounding it in enemy fleets, the flagship looked brutally functional, every line designed for endurance rather than beauty. Thick armor plates overlapped like the scales of an ancient beast. Massive kinetic cannons rested beneath reinforced housings, hidden from casual observation. Along its spine stretched rows of heat radiators glowing faintly against the endless black, quietly releasing the enormous energy generated deep within the vessel's core. There was nothing graceful about the ship. It looked like something built to survive the impossible. Inside its corridors, the air carried the familiar scent of machine oil, recycled oxygen, warm circuitry, and polished steel. Every vibration beneath the crew's boots reminded them that thousands of tons of machinery worked together with relentless precision. Engineers performed final inspections with calm efficiency, checking systems that had been tested hundreds of times before. Marines secured magnetic armor across their shoulders while exchanging silent nods instead of nervous conversation. Medics quietly organized emergency stations they prayed would remain unused. There was no chaos. No shouting. Only disciplined purpose. Every member of the crew understood that preparation had replaced fear long ago. At the center of it all stood Admiral Elias Kane. His reflection stared back from the reinforced observation glass as countless alien warships slowly emerged across the darkness ahead. The enemy formation seemed endless, stretching beyond sensor range like an artificial constellation. Brilliant shields shimmered around impossible vessels shaped like crystalline cities, rotating rings, living organisms, and monuments carved from light itself. Entire civilizations had contributed their greatest warships to this armada. Looking upon it, even seasoned veterans felt an instinctive tightening in their chest. The galaxy hadn't assembled a fleet this large in over 1,000 years. Kane remained perfectly still. His weathered face betrayed nothing. Yet behind his calm expression, memories quietly surfaced. He remembered watching rocket launches as a child beneath Earth's blue skies. He remembered the first permanent colony on Mars. He remembered the decades when humanity stood alone, ignored by civilizations that measured worth through spectacle instead of resilience. Those years had taught Earth a lesson no council could understand. Survival wasn't earned by building what others expected. It was earned by preparing for the day everyone underestimated you. A young communications officer stepped forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, the council has transmitted their final demand." Kane accepted the data tablet without immediately reading it. He already knew every word before the message appeared. Surrender. Disarm. Accept occupation. Become another obedient member of the Galactic Order. Around him, the bridge remained silent. Hundreds of eyes watched their commander, waiting not simply for orders, but for reassurance. Kane slowly looked across the faces of his officers, people from every nation on Earth, united not by politics or language, but by one shared responsibility. Behind them lay billions of lives. Ahead waited an empire that believed humanity had already lost. He inhaled slowly. Then turned his eyes back toward the endless sea of enemy ships. "Maintain formation," he said calmly. "No speeches. No dramatic declarations. Only quiet confidence. Because somewhere deep inside every human vessel, hidden beneath layers of steel and decades of secrecy, rested a truth the galaxy had never imagined. And before this day was over, the stars themselves would learn what humanity had really been building in silence. The countdown reached its final second. Every display on the bridge of the Vanguard flashed crimson as synchronized clocks across Earth's fleet aligned with absolute precision. No alarms screamed. No frantic voices filled the command deck. Instead, an almost sacred silence settled over every compartment, as though the ships themselves understood the gravity of what was about to happen. Admiral Elias Kane stood unmoving before the command console, his eyes fixed on the single authorization switch sealed beneath a layer of armored crystal. For decades it had remained untouched, protected by protocols so secret that even most captains believed it was nothing more than a symbolic safeguard. Entire generations had trained without ever learning its true purpose. Humanity had built countless warships, but only one weapon had been designed never to be seen, unless civilization itself stood on the edge of extinction. Outside, the Galactic Coalition celebrated too early. The instant Earth's fleet powered down, thousands of alien commanders interpreted the sudden loss of emissions as catastrophic system failure. Tactical displays across the enemy armada lit up with victory projections. Bright formations loosened as disciplined battle lines dissolved into celebration. Some captains ordered weapons powered down to preserve energy for the occupation that would surely follow. Others broadcast triumphant messages directly to the Galactic Council, announcing that electronic suppression had crippled the primitive humans without firing a shot. Even within the council chamber, applause erupted. Delegates rose from their floating platforms, exchanging congratulations while historians quietly finalized records describing the peaceful collapse of Earth's resistance. To them, the outcome had become official before a single human surrendered. Then something impossible happened. The stars began to move. Not the ships. Not the planets. The stars themselves. At first it appeared as a minor distortion, barely noticeable against the endless darkness. Tiny points of light stretched into delicate threads before slowly bending inward, as though the entire galaxy had taken a silent breath. Constellations warped into unfamiliar shapes. Sensor arrays across thousands of vessels immediately reported impossible gravitational fluctuations that violated every accepted law of physics. Artificial intelligences attempted millions of calculations before simultaneously returning the same impossible conclusion. Error. Reality inconsistent, ***. Confusion swept through the alien fleet. What is causing the lensing? Has someone activated a singularity weapon? No gravitational source detected. The questions multiplied. The answers never came. Deep beneath the armored decks of the Vanguard, hidden inside chambers that had remained sealed since the ship's construction, machines older than many civilizations awakened one by one. Massive containment rings rotated with glacial precision. Superconducting rails extended for kilometers through the vessel's central spine. Invisible magnetic fields locked together with microscopic accuracy as reactor output surged beyond anything the ship had ever displayed publicly. Entire sections of the flagship disappeared from conventional sensors, wrapped inside carefully engineered distortions that concealed what was happening within. Engineers watched ancient indicator lights shift from dormant amber to brilliant white. Some had devoted their entire careers to maintaining systems they were never permitted to understand. Now, for the first time, they witnessed their purpose unfold. Admiral Kane lowered his hand onto the armored crystal. For a brief moment, he hesitated. Not from fear. From memory. He thought of every generation that had sacrificed comfort to protect this secret. Scientists who vanished from public history. Shipbuilders who constructed components without knowing where they belonged. Crews who trained for missions they prayed would never exist. Humanity had never entered the technological race because it had abandoned the finish line everyone else pursued. While empires competed to produce brighter plasma weapons, faster warp drives, and stronger energy shields, Earth's greatest minds had quietly obsessed over one forgotten principle. Momentum. Simple. Ancient. Relentless. If enough mass could be accelerated. If enough energy could be compressed. If reality itself could be persuaded to carry that force without tearing apart. Then no shield would matter. No armor would survive. No empire could hide behind physics. Kane pressed the authorization switch. The crystal shattered beneath his palm. Across every human ship, power vanished completely. Darkness swallowed bridges. Engines fell silent. To every observer, Earth's fleet appeared dead. But beneath that silence, the first reality compression accelerator in human history came alive. And for the first time since intelligent life had looked toward the stars, the universe itself became humanity's trigger. The firing sequence completed without fanfare. No blaring sirens. No brilliant beam carving through the darkness. No expanding sphere of fire to satisfy the expectations of those watching. For one endless heartbeat, nothing happened at all. Every alien commander stared at tactical displays, waiting for a weapon signature that never appeared. The bridge crews of the coalition exchanged puzzled glances as their sensors insisted that Earth's fleet had released no measurable energy, no radiation burst, no antimatter bloom, no detectable projectile. It was as if the humans had activated a weapon that simply did not exist. Across the command deck of the Vanguard, every officer remained frozen in absolute silence. They knew the truth. The weapon could not be seen because it wasn't traveling through space in any conventional sense. It was riding a corridor of compressed reality, carrying a level of kinetic force that the universe itself struggled to contain. Then the flagship of the Galactic Council vanished. There was no explosion. No flash. No warning. One moment, the colossal vessel dominated the battlefield like a floating continent of crystal and living metal, its luminous shield shimmering with the combined technology of dozens of civilizations. The next. It was gone. Not shattered. Not burning. Gone. An empty void marked the place where nearly 3 million souls had existed only a fraction of a second earlier. The projectile had passed so completely through the vessel that its molecular structure lost cohesion before the crew could register fear. Time itself seemed to hesitate as every nearby ship struggled to comprehend the impossible absence. A second later, the nightmare spread. The invisible wave continued forward. One dreadnought after another simply opened from bow to stern, split by an impossibly clean line that ignored armor, shields, and reinforced singularity plating as though they were made of dust. Gigantic carriers folded inward under their own momentum before drifting apart in perfect silence. Orbital command stations hundreds of thousands of kilometers behind the front line fractured into glittering clouds of debris without ever detecting what had struck them. Fleets positioned safely beyond visual range disappeared from sensor maps one after another, erased by a force that refused to slow down. Across the battlefield, chaos erupted. Warning lights flooded every bridge. Artificial intelligences crashed under contradictory calculations. Navigation systems spun wildly as local space twisted in the projectile's wake, leaving scars across the fabric of reality itself. Entire formations broke apart as terrified commanders abandoned military discipline in desperate attempts to flee. Ships collided while trying to escape a threat they couldn't track, couldn't target, and couldn't understand. Proud admirals who had spent centuries mastering warfare suddenly found themselves commanding frightened survivors instead of invincible armadas. Inside the council chamber, celebration transformed into horror. The laughter stopped. Delegates watched the live tactical projection in stunned silence as fleet markers blinked out by the hundreds. Military analysts stared helplessly at displays that refused to provide explanations. Historians quietly closed the reports they had prepared declaring humanity's defeat. Every prediction, every simulation, every certainty, dissolved before their eyes. For the first time in living memory, the Galactic Council witnessed something beyond its understanding. Back aboard the Vanguard, Admiral Elias Kane finally allowed himself to breathe. He looked at the battlefield, not with triumph, but with quiet sorrow. Every life lost, even among his enemies, weighed heavily upon him. This was never the future humanity had wanted. They had spent generations hiding this weapon because they understood its terrible purpose. It was never meant to win wars. It was meant to end them before another could begin. Around him, his officers slowly realized they were still alive. Some closed their eyes in silent relief. Others stared through the observation window, unable to process the impossible scene unfolding before them. The greatest military alliance in galactic history had come seeking surrender. Instead, it had been broken by a single shot. One round. One decision. One species that had spent centuries being mocked for clinging to primitive ideas, until those very ideas became the most devastating force the stars had ever witnessed. And in the deafening silence that followed, every surviving civilization learned a lesson that would echo across the galaxy for generations. Never underestimate a people who mastered patience long before they mastered power. Silence became the loudest sound the galaxy had ever heard. The battlefield above Karos, once crowded with impossible fleets and dazzling formations of alien power, had transformed into a graveyard drifting through endless darkness. Broken hulls rotated slowly without purpose. Fragments of crystalline armor reflected the pale light of distant stars like frozen tears scattered across the void. Disabled warships floated motionless beside shattered command stations, their emergency beacons blinking faintly into an uncaring universe. No victory chants echoed across communication channels. No triumphant declarations filled the silence. The only signals that remained were desperate distress calls, automated rescue transmissions, and countless unanswered pleas carried through the vacuum. The war that had been expected to reshape the galaxy had ended in less than a minute, and its aftermath felt far heavier than the battle itself. Inside the Galactic Council chamber, no one dared to speak. The enormous holographic display still hovered above the center of the hall, but the image it projected no longer inspired confidence. Fleet icons had vanished almost entirely, leaving only scattered survivors retreating in every direction. Representatives who had mocked humanity only moments earlier now stared in stunned disbelief, their expressions stripped of arrogance. Ancient civilizations that had ruled star systems for thousands of years suddenly found themselves confronting a truth more terrifying than defeat: they had fundamentally misunderstood the species they believed they controlled. The Council's authority had never truly been challenged before. Now, in a single unimaginable moment, the illusion of its invincibility had collapsed forever. Days passed. Across thousands of inhabited worlds, every public screen replayed the battle repeatedly. Scientists slowed the recordings frame by frame, searching for hidden energy signatures that weren't there. Military academies abandoned centuries of tactical doctrine overnight. Religious leaders called the event either divine judgment or a warning from the universe itself. News networks struggled to explain how a civilization dismissed as technologically primitive had defeated the greatest alliance in recorded history with a single invisible strike. Yet no explanation satisfied the fear spreading across the stars. Humanity had not merely won a battle. It had rewritten the definition of power. One by one, diplomatic vessels departed their home systems, not carrying armies, but emissaries. Where fleets had once gathered, ambassadors now traveled. Where ultimatums had once been delivered, peace treaties replaced them. The first delegation arrived in Earth's orbit beneath white flags recognized in every known language of the galaxy. They expected celebrations, military parades, monuments to victory, and proud displays of the terrible weapon that had humbled civilizations older than Earth's recorded history. Instead, they found ordinary life. Children chased one another through green parks beneath blue skies. Farmers harvested fields that stretched toward distant mountains. Construction crews repaired bridges damaged during earlier conflicts. Families gathered around dinner tables, laughing over simple conversations while evening rain tapped softly against their windows. Earth had not become obsessed with conquest. It had simply returned home. Admiral Elias Kane stood alone on a quiet hillside overlooking the ocean as the first alien diplomatic shuttles descended through the atmosphere. Waves rolled steadily against ancient cliffs, just as they had for millions of years before humanity ever reached the stars. Cool wind carried the scent of salt and rain across the landscape, reminding him why every sacrifice had mattered. Behind him rested a world filled not with perfect people, but with people worth protecting. He understood better than anyone that the greatest victory was not destroying an enemy. It was ensuring that children could wake tomorrow without hearing the sound of war. As sunlight slowly broke through the clouds, Kane looked toward the sky where stars were beginning to appear once more. Somewhere beyond them, countless civilizations would tell stories about this day. Some would remember humanity with fear. Others with respect. A few with gratitude. But every one of them would remember the lesson carved forever into galactic history. Strength is not measured by how loudly a civilization threatens. Nor by the size of its fleets. Nor by the brilliance of its weapons. True strength is measured by the restraint to remain peaceful while possessing the power to end everything. And from that day forward, whenever ambitious empires laughed at small worlds standing alone against impossible odds, someone would always whisper the same warning before history had the chance to repeat itself. Never mistake humanity's silence for weakness, because sometimes, the quietest civilization is the one that only needs to fire once.